Another day, another devastating scientific report telling us that the threat to humanity from global warming is serious, as if the floods and the droughts and the raging forest fires hadn't already made you wonder. The UN Secretary-General described the latest report from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change as code red for humanity. He says the alarm bells are ringing. But is anybody listening? Really? I'm Gayle in Berlin, and this is The Day.
The main conclusions of this report is that climate change is getting worse.
Climate change is a problem that is here now. Nobody's safe, and it's getting worse faster.
The door is still ajar, there is still time to act, but the door is closing.
It is indisputable that human activities are causing climate change.
Recent changes in the climate are widespread, rapid, and intensifying, unprecedented in thousands of years.
I don't think I will be able to sleep tonight.
Also on the day, the Turkish countryside going up in flames and the volunteers trying to deal with record-breaking forest fires by themselves.
The fires grow very fast. I have never seen anything like this before. In some places, it really looks like scenes from hell. I couldn't just sit at home and watch. I had to come here and do something.
Welcome to The Day. We begin with yet another scientific report telling us what we thought we already knew. It is unequivocal. The first words of the report from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. It's unequivocal that the climate crisis is caused by human activities. What makes this latest batch of bad news more significant is in its title. It's intergovernmental. The world's governments have signed off on its conclusion that the world is heating faster than we thought, that the frequency of extreme weather events is accelerating and that we are to blame. But they say it is still not too late.
Code red for humanity. That's how the UN Secretary-General described the report. It's first since 2014. It states unequivocally that we are to blame for global warming. Greenhouse gas emissions from human activities have driven the global temperature up by 1.1 degrees since 1850. And it's on course to pass the 1.5 degree limit already by 2030, unless rapid action is taken. Effects of the temperature rise have never been more visible. Wildfires are scorching parts of the planet, while severe floods have left other parts submerged. Still, the authors stress it's not too late.
And so if we stop warming at 1.5 degrees, then we will also stop many of these extremes from getting worse. We can slow these changes down, and we can stop many of the others from getting worse by urgently and drastically reducing CO2 emissions in the next decade.
It comes as policymakers prepare for a crucial climate summit in November. Activists want them to honour their commitments.
This is absolutely down to governments, and there are only a few critical governments which are really important. You know, the rich countries agreed more than 10 years ago to put a pot of money together to help developing countries deal with climate change. 10 years later, they have still not got that money together.
The UN panel says its report will be critical for negotiations at the upcoming summit. The future of our planet could hinge on its outcome.
Let's take a closer look at this with Nicholas Boers from the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research. Welcome to DW. I'd like you to try and make this real for us. We have the Paris Agreement talking about restricting global warming to 1.5 Celsius above pre-industrial levels. And now we have this latest IPCC report, which says that if our carbon emissions don't fall in the next 20 years, then a catastrophic 2 or 3 degrees warming is one of the scenarios that they envisage. So explain to us the difference between our world now and a world with a 2-degree increase.
Yeah, maybe first of all, to set that into proper relations. So we are already currently, as it was just said, already at 1.1 going towards 1.2 degrees warming above the 1850 to 1900 average. And to increase that towards 2 degrees, it's important to understand that we are already, it's absolutely clear with certainty now, that's what the IPCC, the new report says, that anthropogenic greenhouse gas emissions are responsible for this warming. CO2 concentrations have gone up by almost 50%, and they're now higher than during the last 2 million years. And we already see a lot of changes in terms of more frequent heat waves. The effect of the warming is really basically certain as well. We're seeing an increasing frequency of droughts already, and it's likely that it's said to be likely that that's also caused by the warming. But then by 2100, in a 2 degrees, by 2100, the world would have warmed by 2 degrees. Then extreme heat waves will be 10 to 15 times more likely. There will be more frequent droughts in parts of South America, Africa, and the Mediterranean. And there is also increasing frequency of extreme rainfall. And so even without these very sophisticated climate models, really from simple physics, the Clausius-Clapeyron law, we know for sure that such rainfall extremes will become more likely with rising temperatures because the water holding capacity of the atmosphere rises by approximately 7% per degree of warming. This extra amount of water will also precipitate an extreme rainfall event. So then if we take the numbers from the most recent report based on these sophisticated models, then extreme rainfall events will be around 70% more frequent in a 2 degrees warmer world. And apart from the extremes, it's also that global sea level rise by 2100 will have risen by 1/3 to 1/2 meter. But then because of deep ocean warming and ice sheet melt in the long term, so just if we stay at 2 degrees even, in 2000 years, global sea level would have risen by 2 to 6 meters.
OK. And the bad news doesn't stop there. You've been involved in research that shows that a crucial system of currents in the Atlantic that helps to control temperatures in the Northern Hemisphere is also showing evidence of instability, which could make things even worse. Explain what this is and why we should care.
Yeah, so this ocean system, it's called the Atlantic Meridional Overturning Circulation, in short, AMOC. And it brings warm, salty water masses from the tropics to the North Atlantic, where due to density gradients, so the salty water masses are heavier than the surrounding water masses up there, it sinks, and that's basically the engine that drives this current. And by bringing all these warm water masses to the North Atlantic, it also causes the relatively mild temperatures that we experience here in Europe. And what has been known for quite some time, or assumed, expected for quite some time, but it was based on both model evidence, but also based on paleoclimate records, so evidence, indirect evidence from ice cores and from ocean cores, that in this ocean circulation system exhibits 2 alternative stable states. So the one would be the one that is currently attained, that is the strong circulation mode. But in principle, it can rather abruptly transition to a much weaker mode of operation at which much less heat would be brought to the North Atlantic. Right. And the consequences of that would be decreasing temperatures in Europe, stronger decreasing in winter, and more. The further you move north, the larger the differences. There would be rising sea level at the eastern coast of North America. But maybe most worrisome would be the effects in the tropics. So due to the changes in sea surface temperature patterns, then a collapse of this AMOC would affect the tropical monsoon systems in South America, Africa, and India. And in particular for Western Africa, there is concern that a collapse of the AMOC would lead to rather permanent drought conditions over there.
OK. Nicholas Boers from the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research, thank you.
You're welcome.
So, as we've just heard, scientists are blaming climate change for the wildfires raging across southern Europe. One of the countries bearing the brunt of these blazes is Greece. Thousands of people have been evacuated from the country's second largest island, Evia, which has seen the most severe fire of the dozens ravaging the country. Ferries and warships are bringing people to safety as strong winds spread the flames. Well, the situation's similar in neighbouring Turkey, which is also battling its most destructive blazes in living memory. Tens of thousands of people have been evacuated from coastal regions as huge swathes of forests are consumed by fire. And President Recep Tayyip Erdogan is facing fierce criticism over his handling of the disaster. DW correspondent Julia Hahn reports from Milas on the Aegean coast, where volunteers have had to step in to help.
Eren Temren is not a forest worker. He is a tech consultant from Istanbul. A week ago, he dropped everything and rushed to southern Turkey to join the fight against the wildfires. Now, he and his friends are helping authorities here in Milas on the Aegean coast to build fire breaks. Areas free of vegetation that act as barriers to stop the flames from spreading. The fires grow very fast. I have never seen anything like this before. In some places, it really looks like scenes from hell. I couldn't just sit at home and watch. I had to come here and do something. Chainsaws, helmets, protective glasses. Eren and his friends have paid for the equipment out of their own pockets. They are among thousands of volunteers from across the country who have joined efforts to contain the blazes and help those affected. Turkey hasn't seen such devastating wildfires in decades. I believe that some of them were caused intentionally. But of course, the climate crisis and the hot weather also play a role. When it all comes together, it leads to disaster. A disaster firefighters have been struggling to get under control. Over the past days, dramatic scenes have unfolded as desperate villagers and volunteers stepped in to help contain blazes raging near their doorsteps. The extent of the destruction in the fire-hit regions is unprecedented. The flames have turned huge tracts of forests and fields into grey landscapes. According to estimates, at least 100,000 hectares have been destroyed, an area bigger than the German capital Berlin. Hardly any green trees, as far as the eye can see. And the people who survived this inferno are increasingly asking, how could it come to this? And what is the government doing to make sure it won't happen again? Local Mayor Muhammed Tokat, a member of Turkey's main opposition party, has been sounding the alarm for days. The flames nearly destroyed a thermal power plant in his district. On this parking lot, he and his team are now coordinating aid for those affected by the fires. Tokat says the region did not receive the help needed from the central government. We are in a very dramatic situation. It's unacceptable that a powerful state like Turkey does not own any functioning firefighting planes. We wouldn't have lost that much forest if we had more planes ready when the blazes first erupted. We are facing a worst-case scenario, and we were not prepared for it. In the forest of Milas, Eren Temren and his friends are taking a short break. They have been working non-stop the few last days, in temperatures of around 40 degrees Celsius. But now isn't the time for recriminations, Eren says. Now's the time to help stop the flames from spreading and save what's left of Turkey's forests.
Well, Julia Hahn is still in Milas and joins us now. Welcome, Julia. Are those fires now under control?
Well, it's still too early to give the all clear. That's what authorities here have been saying. But compared to last week when we saw the flames raging uncontrolled in many large forest areas here in the region, the situation has improved. I'm in one of the villages now that had to be evacuated because the flames crept dangerously close to a power plant here in the area last week. And now you can see many residents, many local tourists have returned. Life has returned to this place. Turkish authorities say that 270 separate fires erupted here in Turkey in the last 2 weeks, and that most of them are now under control, but firefighting operations continue in at least 3 locations here on the Aegean coast. And experts have been warning that the general threat is far from over because it's still very hot, very dry and very windy.
And we heard criticism in your report of the government response and the lack of useful firefighting equipment. What's Ankara saying about that?
Well, first of all, this criticism has not only been voiced by the political opposition here in Turkey, it's also coming from the people here in the fire-hit areas who have lost everything. And it has been expressed on social media, where people say they are angry at what they say is a lack of preparedness on behalf of the Turkish government, a government that had to admit that it did not own a functioning, a usable fleet of water-dropping planes when the fires first erupted. So planes from countries like Russia, Azerbaijan, Iran, Ukraine, Spain or Croatia have been fighting the blazes here in Turkey in recent weeks now. The government has so far rejected all the criticism or has tried to redirect the criticism. President Erdogan, in a TV interview, for example, accused the opposition of spreading, and I quote him here, a terror of lies. And prosecutors have also launched an investigation into a social media campaign using the hashtag Help Turkey, a social media campaign that has been seeking international support to help combat the blazes.
It's all about climate change today with this IPCC report. And one wonders how seriously Turkey has been taking this issue. Has climate policy been a big talking point there?
Not really. It's certainly not one of the main issues here on the political agenda in Turkey. Turkey is one of a handful of nations that have not yet ratified the 2015 Paris Climate Agreement, although the Turkish government has put forward its own climate action plans and seeks to reduce greenhouse emissions by 21% until 2030. But many critics say politicians in Ankara just fail to understand the emergency and the urgency of this crisis, but that actually might change now because the wildfires here have really caused massive destruction, and many people that I met here in the past days are calling for more climate action by Turkish authorities.
OK, thank you for that. DW correspondent Julia Hahn in Milas in Turkey. Well, the Olympics came to an end with a closing ceremony in Tokyo last night. It was an unusual tournament for everyone involved, but especially for the athletes, who were kept rigorously separated from the local population. Now the Games are over and the athletes are on their way home. Many are finally getting a chance to meet their fans face to face.
With the Games over, the athletes' village is emptying. The stars of the 2020 Olympics at last making their way home. And homecoming heroes have been welcomed in style across the globe. US gold medal winning gymnast Suni Lee was given a royal reception by fans, friends and neighbours in Minnesota.
Congratulations! I'm going to get emotional, but thank you so much for coming out. It truly is amazing, and it's just like, I'm so overwhelmed, and I really feel all of the love and support that all of you have given me throughout my whole entire journey, and especially now since I'm an Olympic gold medalist. Like, it just...
On Moscow's Red Square, there was another patriotic party thrown in honour of the athletes competing under the banner of the Russian Olympic Committee. And Burkina Faso celebrated the return of the country's first ever Olympic medalist. The dream has become reality. We have the first Olympic medal for Burkina Faso. The medal count is now open, and I know that I and future generations will perhaps win even more in upcoming events. France awaits more than just the return of its athletes. It awaits the Games. Tokyo has now passed the baton to Paris, host city of the next Olympics in 2024.
Well, how successful was this controversial event. Joining me now is Michael Payne, who headed the International Olympic Committee's marketing for 2 decades. Welcome to DW. What do you think? The Games were delayed. They were held in isolation against the wishes of the Japanese people. Are they likely to be seen as a success for Tokyo?
I think in the end that absolutely they were a success against incredible odds. I mean, in many ways, it was a miracle that they took place. I mean, these were the games that were going to die. Everybody was expecting them to be cancelled, and the IOC and the Japanese government persevered. I don't think anybody fully understands the complexity of what that postponement for 1 year meant, or the complexity of getting 205 nations to Tokyo. But in the end, it succeeded. The Games didn't become a mass spreader event for COVID. They were staged safely, and the world saw incredible sporting performances, as you've just seen with the welcome of the athletes back home.
Well, we won't know about whether it was a spreader event for until the next couple of weeks. But I suppose, aside from looking at whether actually holding the event at all was a success, one wonders, as an Olympic event, was it watched? Did it get even bigger viewings because we were all in lockdown? Did it cost Tokyo because there was no one there to watch it live? What do you think?
Well, you've raised many issues there. I think, firstly, the global audiences in many countries set records, notably in Japan, where more than 90% of the population watched, and it was the highest rated television in more than 2 decades. So for all of the opposition before the Games, once the Games started, once Japan started winning gold medals, the public became very, very supportive. And, you know, in countries from Britain to Australia, they set some of the highest ratings they've seen for the Olympics.
Well, I'm not sure about that, because, I mean, you mentioned, forgive me, you mentioned Britain in there. One of the things, I'm British myself, and one of the things that's been quite interesting is that because it was not shown on the BBC, because it was given to a private, the Disney Channel carried it, lots of people were saying, well, actually, we haven't watched it, or we've only watched the bits that the BBC carried. There wasn't the sort of the blanket coverage that there normally is. So I question whether there were record audiences around the world.
I mean, I would differ with you on that. I mean, the BBC had 2 channels showing full coverage throughout. It's true they sub-licensed then the additional coverage to Discovery. But when you're running close to 24 hours coverage wall to wall, the coverage that the BBC showed was way more than they showed for the Sydney Games or the Beijing Games. Only recently, with the digital and the expansion of digital, have you then been able to watch every sport. And there was controversy in Britain because everybody was used to seeing everything free of charge. But you look at the final audience numbers between the BBC, between the digital coverage and Discovery, they were records set.
How did Tokyo do financially with this? Did the pandemic affect it both in terms of the postponement and the actual staging of the event into empty stadiums?
Well, there are a lot of costs. There's a lot of debate around the financial discussion. There's a lot of numbers being floated around, talk of $15 billion. I think, to be fair, you have to separate the cost of the Games and the cost of the capital infrastructure, because there was an awful lot of construction development. And the Japanese, I mean, they have been very creative in loading all sorts of capital infrastructure costs on the budget. But the fact that they weren't able to sell any tickets, the government's decision not to allow any spectators, that will have hit the organising committee, and they will have lost probably close to $1 billion by not having any ticketing revenue that will be funded by the government. But that decision not to let spectators, I'm not sure it was just about COVID. There was an awful lot of unusual local politics going on building up to the election. You had no spectators at the Olympics, yet the government decided it was perfectly okay to have spectators at the baseball events, at the sumo wrestling events. So there was a lot of confusion, shall we say, and political decisions taken that I'm not sure we will ever properly understand.
Right. Good talking. That's very interesting. Thank you so much for joining us. Michael Payne.
My pleasure.
Well, the returning Olympians in Paris played second fiddle to another athlete expected to arrive across town. Paris Saint-Germain fans flocked to the club's stadium as rumours spread that Lionel Messi was about to undergo a medical before signing for the French side. It was confirmed last week that the Argentinian superstar would be leaving Barcelona after 21 years. There's been no sign of him in Paris yet, but the excitement amongst fans is palpable. Well, that was the day. As ever, the conversation continues online. You'll find us on Twitter at DW News. Thank you for making us part of your day. Bye-bye.